cold, and they just start falling because they're, I guess, cold-blooded reptiles, and so that cold weather kind of freaks them out a little bit. So you can literally just be, walking somewhere, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, one of these, huge dinosaur-looking things just kind of falls out of the sky. Boy, that's creepy. Man, it's as creepy as it gets. All right, let's get some more comments. Anthony Jones says, have you heard anything about a wide receivers coach yet? What's your thoughts about the situation? Yeah, we talked about a little bit about this yesterday, that it seems like you've got a couple of different categories of names that seem to be kicked around for wide receivers coach. By the way, let me welcome in Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, all the various platforms. Good morning to you, and thanks for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp today. We'll get going on the show in just a moment. Let me just finish off a couple of comments here. You've got that pocket of former Georgia players that seem to get some attention. Hines Ward's been one of those guys. Terence Edwards has been one of those guys. Brian McClendon has been one of those guys. Of that group, McClendon, a little bit more of the traditional name because he's been in a role like this before. He's done a lot of recruiting before. There is a degree to which someone like Hines Ward, although he is a wide receivers coach now, is still a little bit of a non-traditional coach because he hasn't really recruited at the kind of level that you would have to do at a place like Georgia. And for Terence, he's another kind of non-traditional guy because he hasn't been a college coach as of yet. Now, I do believe that Terence Edwards has a very good chance of being a college coach at some point in time because that's how good I think he is. We've also been very open and clear about the fact that we root for Terence in situations like this just because we think he's good for football and we'd love to see him advance if that's indeed what he wants to do. So you've got that category there when it comes to former Georgia players in the mix, and given the need that Georgia has at wide receiver, maybe that causes a guy like McClendon to step forward amongst that group a little bit more because of the fact that he does have a little bit more traditional resume. We referenced on yesterday's show when you look at the recruiting work he did at South Carolina, even for a guy like Josh Vann out of Tucker High School. That's a player that when, you see the way he played against Georgia this year, for instance, that's a guy that, hey, maybe Georgia went, after South Carolina on. McClendon helped South Carolina win that recruiting battle. That's an example of the kind of thing that he could do more of if he was at a place like Georgia. I also think outside names are going to be considered, where you start bringing like the Mickey Josephs or, names like that. I think some of those outside names are going to be considered. But that's basically the two kind of twin pillars you have here. You have that group of former UGA guys like Hines, guys like Terence, guys like Brian McClendon, and then after that, guys who have credentialed resumes but not necessarily of that former Georgia stripe. And I think some of those guys are getting some of the consideration as well. And it's probably a little bit more difficult to determine of that who are the more serious names from that group to consider. But obviously, it's an important hire for UGA. Oh, excuse me, Dog Daddy. It's not an armadillo, it's an iguana. You're right, Dog Daddy, my bad. Brad Hotton also the same thing. Sorry about that. Not armadillos. Armadillos live in Texas. These are iguanas. But they are creepy. Yeah, Dale Hall, the same thing. I have definitely confused armadillos and iguanas. Armadillos are a totally different thing. These are iguanas. Yes, that's right. Iguanas. All right. Dogs on Top says Kearis Jackson is a wonderful thing returning for third downs. I think that's right. We will also talk to Terence Edwards about that a little bit in a moment, too. So here's what's on today's show. A former Georgia player getting ready for the NFL draft, getting a lot of interesting pre-draft buzz. I think this tells us something pretty interesting about what college football is all about here in 2022. We'll do some of that. As I said before, Terence Edwards. There was a wild rant yesterday from a current SEC assistant coach that certainly got a lot of attention, too. We talked about this some on SEC Country Live. Need to talk about that with you here because, man, oh, man, a lot of questions being asked about exactly what all this means. We'll do some of that. A little bit of buzz on Christian Miller to follow up on what we talked about yesterday. And off the top of the program, 6 Georgia players who are already generating some preseason buzz. This is going to be fun, going to be cool. Let's do it right now as DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. Find them online at theatlantadivorceteam.com.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
You know, we all have jobs, and the job that we do, there are going to be certain things about the job that we just are far more aware of than anybody else, and your job is the same way. You just sort of zero in on things that to an outsider might seem a little bit weird. My job is really no different in that respect, and I'll give you an example of this here. I get really confused sometimes trying to define three phrases, especially this time of year. Those three phrases are last season, this season, and next season. What is last season? What is technically this season? And what would be next season? Now, there are some times when that's not so confusing. Like if I'm talking to you in November, if I say last season, well, you clearly know that was 2020. Or if I say next season, you know that to be 2022. And this season, the season we're in, is obviously the 2021 season. But now we are in calendar year 2022. We are about to put the finishing touches on the 2022 signing class. We are still several weeks ahead of the start of spring practice. So when exactly does last season become this season when you have that conversation? Sometimes that's not always quite so easy to define. Now, admittedly, in a lot of years around here at DawgNation, we're probably pretty ready and pretty energized about moving on from what was the previous season to the next season, because when you don't win the national championship, there's always that thought of this time of year, hope kind of springing eternal, and you're ready to turn the page and get ready for the upcoming new year. When you're the reigning national champion, and Georgia is, maybe you're a little slower on that. Maybe you don't quite want to do that quite so quickly of turning that page to the new season. Maybe you want to stick in the present tense of the fact that Georgia just won a national championship, but as the old country song says, eventually time does march on, and eventually you got to get ready for what was this season to turn into last season, and all of a sudden now you find yourself in this season. It used to be next season, now it's this season. Does that make sense? You follow me on this, that we are now in the point in the conversation of the calendar year where 2022 starts to feel like this season, where it's time to start talking about what's going to happen in the fall of this calendar year as the thing that's in the present tense and on the minds of Georgia fans. And there is some good news about that. Even with all that Georgia is losing off of its 2021 national championship roster, there are already a lot of Georgia players who are generating a good bit of buzz about what they can do here in the 2022 season there as well. And just for a few moments here on this show to kick this off today, I want to kind of show some of this. And I also want to lead into my own wish list of who are some other guys that I hope to see to join these ranks eventually. Let me give it to you like this. For instance, and Connor Riley's done a really good job of chronicling some of this there on the pages of DawgNation.com. For instance, the other day, ESPN put out its list of way too early All-American considerations for next season. It's kind of cool to see 3 Georgia players on that list for who can be All-Americans in 2022. 2 of those guys, probably not a huge surprise. Jalen Carter on defense, getting predictions already to be preseason All-American there at the defensive line position. Clearly, defensive line was one of Georgia's top strengths this season. You'd like to see some carry over that for next year. A guy like Carter has a chance to be one of the best players in America. Probably not a huge surprise. Brock Bowers is a rubber stamp as a first-team All-American probably for the 2022 campaign, given the fact that's essentially what he was this season as well. So probably no real surprise there. The addition to that list that certainly gets your attention and makes you feel kind of excited about what could be to come for next year. Keely Ringo shows up on this list. There was also a thing the other day at ESPN from Bill Conley about Ringo being one of the signees from the class of 2020 who has a chance to do even more here in the 2022 season. All of this for Ringo, of course, coming on the heels of the interception to seal the deal and win the game against Alabama. He's clearly a lot more top of mind for a lot more folks because of that. And now he's even getting some All-American buzz for ESPN next season. I think that's kind of fun to think about. There was also the thing at Pro Football Focus the other day where they were looking at the top 10 receivers for next season. And Georgia didn't have a guy on that list, but Arian Smith did make the sleeper category of someone who could maybe be on a list like that by the end of next year. And obviously the thing that Pro Football Focus cited with him was the blazing track star style speed that Smith has. And we talked about this when Connor was on the show with us on Tuesday, that if there is a great receiver, I'm talking about at the wide receiver position, if there is a great receiver on Georgia's 2022 roster. I do believe that Smith is the safest, best bet to be that. That's by no means a guarantee that I think that's going to happen, but when you look at the dimension that he has, that a lot of even very good Georgia pass catchers really haven't always had in recent seasons, Smith, that dimension of speed, I think gives him a chance to be that guy. So you'll add him to the list of already Pro Football Focus, and listen, Kirby Smart's kind of said what he said about Pro Football Focus in the past, and sometimes I guess I have some suspicions about some of that kind of stuff too. But nonetheless, it's still kind of nice to see one of your guys getting some buzz from Pro Football Focus as a speedster, as a potential sleeper, as a guy that could break out in a big way when it comes to the wide receiver spot for next season. Then there was also this from ESPN. You may have seen this, and I know DawgNation has a story about this too, that Malachi Starks, one of those 2022 signees, is already kind of getting some talk as, hey, when you're looking at breakout guys from the 2022 class that could be big contributors next season for the most important teams in the country, ESPN cited Malachi Starks the other day as one of those guys. So that gives you 5 right there of guys who are going to be on the Georgia roster for next season, who are already starting to get some talk, already starting to get some buzz, already a lot of intrigue building around them. Guys like Carter and Brock Bowers on their side of the ball, arguably best players in the country. Guys like Keely Ringo, Arian Smith could truly be breakout guys. Ringo probably already had a pretty good season, but breaking out to an even better category next year of household name that's recognized as one of the top players in the country across the board, no matter where fans are on that. Much the same way, someone like Arian Smith can maybe do that on the offensive side of the ball there as well. The Starks is the incoming freshman. But also one more thing I thought was kind of interesting on that. 24/7 Sports, like a lot of these recruiting shops, kind of updating their end-of-year rankings, their final rankings, the final star categories, who are the final 5 stars for the class of 2022. And in that in mind, one of their writers the other day said something I thought was really nice about Jalen Walker on Twitter. I want to show you this because it leads me into something else that I want to say here today. So Jalen Walker gets the 5-star nod from 24/7 Sports, not the composite, but 24/7 individually. And what Andrew Ivins says, who's a writer for 24/7 Sport, is a former SEC assistant told me that Walker will, quote, play right away after seeing him move around there at the Under Armour practice. So that's another guy who's going to be on Georgia's roster for this upcoming 2022 season who's already generating some buzz. And of all the things that I just mentioned, the nod there on Walker might be among the most interesting to me, because if you were to ask me, okay, it's great to hear that about Brock Bowers. You kind of expect that. It's great to hear that about Jalen Walker. You kind of expect that. Fun to hear that about Arian Smith. Fun to hear some things about Keely Ringo. Cool to hear some things about incoming freshmen. But where, BA, do you want to hear buzz moving forward as you get closer to spring practice, into the summer, as you get into that time where the real foundation is laid for what's going to happen for Georgia in 2022? Where do you want to hear more of that buzz showing up? And the cool thing about the Walker thing there from the 24/7 writer is that linebacker for me is one of those spots. As we talked about, earlier this week, when you look at what Nakobe Dean did for Georgia this year, what Channing Tindall did for Georgia this year, what Quay Walker did for Georgia this year, Georgia got so much from that interior linebacker spots that what happens in 2022, man, you just have a lot of big shoes to fill there. And it's not to say that Georgia can't fill them, but it's simply a matter of how close can Georgia come to matching the unbelievably impressive performance of that trio a year ago. So if I had a chance to wave a magic wand, and if I could wish into existence, as a fan here, if I could wish into existence some buzz for this upcoming 2022 season's team, some of that probably for me would be at linebacker. I'd love to hear good things during the spring about Jamon Dumas-Johnson. I'd love to hear good things in the spring about a guy like Smile Mondu. At one point in time, was getting the same kind of chatter on the recruiting trail that Jalen Walker is getting right now. Mondu now a year older and a chance to really show what he's all about. I'd love to hear that buzz. The other place that I would love to start hearing more buzz but the upcoming season, actually I'll give you 2 of these to wrap up this conversation. In addition to the 6 guys who are kind of already getting some of that, here's where else I'd love to hear some buzz as you move forward. Don't you want to hear about running back? With James Cook, what he did for the program this year, with Zamir White, what he's done for Georgia for the entirety of his career. They're moving on to the NFL now. And obviously you got Branson Robinson coming in as a true freshman, a lot of excitement there. But you've also got a duo of guys, Kendall Milton, Kenny McIntosh, who have been really kind of tabbed as breakout for a long time. And this is to say nothing of Dejon Edwards, who I also think is a really good player. But don't you kind of want to hear some of that buzz about that running back spot too? That either Kendall or Kenny or maybe even both have the look of being able to give Georgia the tandem of great backs that really define the 2017 team, the 2018 team, the one area in which the 2021 team was probably a little bit inferior to those previous Georgia teams, especially the one that played for the national championship back in 2017 was you didn't quite have that exceedingly dominant running game. As the preseason buzz continues, I'm hoping to hear some more of that at running back. And I guess to kind of go in tandem with that, I'll say that about offensive line there too. I thought the Georgia offensive line was good here this past season, and I'd love to see that take a stride forward next season, which means you take the bedrock guys that you know for sure, guys like SVP right there in the middle, guys like Warren McClendon, and you start saying, okay, well, who do you put around them? The way that Broderick Jones played in the national championship game maybe leads you to believe that it is now his time for sure, not looking over his shoulder anymore. He's one of those guys. But aren't you ready to hear more about Amarius Mims? Aren't you ready to hear more about that here this offseason, into spring practice, into the summer, that he's ready to be one of the 5 guys in the field somewhere at some position? Seems like it's about time for that. And then for me, the last name I'd mention here is Tate Ratledge coming back from injury. I think if Ratledge had played in 2021, that maybe a good Georgia offensive line would have graduated to great simply because of that one healthy player. That's how good I thought Ratledge was probably going back to the spring. Ultimately, the injury kept him from doing that. The Georgia offensive line probably lost a little bit because of that. But his presence here and buzz around his return to health and what he's providing to UGA would be kind of cool there as well. So let me kind of sum all this up real quickly, and then we'll move on and talk about something different. It's kind of cool to already see some Georgia players getting some big talk. Guys like Brock Bowers and Arian Smith on the offensive side of the ball, guys like Keely Ringo and Jalen Carter on the defensive side of the ball, incoming freshmen like Jalen Walker and Malachi Stark. It's a really cool thing to be able to see. And as we continue to monitor this preseason buzz moving towards spring and summer, I'm hoping to hear more of it about the offensive line. I'm hoping to hear more of it about the linebacker spot and from the running back spot there as well. If Georgia is going to reinvent itself and put together a defense of that national championship, those are some position groups that need to be pretty noisy as well as we move through this offseason. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Merriweather and Tharp. Hello to you, and thank you for being with us, whether it's 9:45, 1st and 15, DawgNation.com, and the DawgNation app. 10 a.m. after that, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, of course, Radio Noon in the Classic City on Athens, Sports Radio 960 The Ref, or podcast form, Apple, Spotify. We post the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com. All kinds of ways for you to listen, watch, whatever you want to do. We try to make the show available on as many platforms as possible, and we really appreciate you tuning in to be a part of it. And I am very grateful as well for our friends at Merriweather and Tharp because they allow us to do this show like this on a daily basis. And I love talking about Georgia football. It's a fun conversation. Unfortunately, though, sometimes in life there are conversations that must be had that just simply aren't quite so much fun. And one of those, unfortunately, is the divorce process. Some of you just kind of find yourself in a situation where divorce is truly the next step for you. And I hate that. That's one of those things where I wish that weren't true for you, but in some cases that just is. You've tried to make the relationship work, but now you've come to the belief that it just may be severed beyond repair. If that's where you find yourself right now, then let me let you turn your attention to my friends at Merriweather and Tharp because they want to hear your story. They want to show support for you. And just sometimes it's just kind of nice to have someone to listen to your story. And that's what Merriweather and Tharp, as a first step, wants to do. But then after that, they want to put their expertise to work for you. I'm talking about thousands of times their attorneys have been through legal situations that might be similar to yours. Of course, your situation is always specific to your own circumstances, but still, there is an institutional knowledge that's gained when you go through the divorce process with other clients, the thousands of times in the past that Merriweather and Tharp has done that gives them the knowledge to know how the law impacts you in your situation, your finances, the relationship you have with your children, all kinds of intricacies about the law that I'm not even really smart enough to even know about, but those folks there, they do know about them. They know what that's all about, and they want to put that to work for you. So go to their website, theatlantadivorceteam.com, find them there, set up that initial consultation with one of their attorneys, tell them your story, and find out how they can explain how you can be really set up for success and more happiness in the next season of your life, and that is a very important thing to do. So theatlantadivorceteam.com, Merriweather and Tharp, your source for Georgia divorce. We are looking forward to having Terence Edwards on the show. Coming up in just a couple of minutes' time, a lot to get into with Terence when it comes to the wide receiver spot, the opening for a wide receivers coach. Obviously, Terence's name's even come up some with that, so we'll continue the conversation with him on that. Also, just the personnel, how it starts to fit together for next season, this season, whatever you want to call it, at the 2022 campaign for the Dogs. We'll do all of that with Terence Edwards coming up in a moment. Before that, though, I want to go around the doghouse, and it's presented today by our friends at ServPro, and I want to follow up on something we talked about for a little bit yesterday, that one of the final pieces for Georgia in its 2022 class is four-star defensive lineman out of Cedar Grove, one of the most talented teams in the Atlanta area, the Cedar Grove Saints, Christian Miller, and Miller's been one of those guys that has been of interest for Georgia fans for quite some time. I hope you got a chance to catch Before the Hedges presented by Kroger last night with Jeff Sintel, because Jeff on the show shared an interview that he recently did with Miller going back to the All-American Bowl, and it's worth watching and seeing the entire thing because Miller's pretty candid about his recruiting process. But the one thing that Miller did make us aware of during that interview is the two schools we kind of think of as way out in front for him, even though he's slated to visit Miami this weekend, the two schools that we think of as being out in front for him, for the most part, he acknowledged that still being true. Buckeyes and Bulldogs. Last night, Before the Hedges presented by Kroger, Christian Miller talked a little bit more about that. This is Miller with Jeff.
Georgia and Ohio State. Remember you told me they were your dream schools in 9th grade? That's who you told, I think, Coach Patrick. Man, it'd be awesome if I can get a chance to go to one of those two schools. And they're still standing. What keeps them there?
That's really that's my strongest schools that's recruiting right now. They both got the edge on my recruitment. Growing up, I watched Georgia. Growing up, I watched Ohio State.
Are you going to sneak up to see those on unofficials? Or I know you can do that with Georgia.
I definitely can do that with Georgia. Ohio State, that might take a little trip. I might have to plan out. But Georgia, I can just hop in my car and go eat something.
I love that at the end. He's like, yeah, George, I can just hop in my car and go eat something. Listen, you feed a young man. What's the old cliche about, the stomach being the weight of the heart or something like that? You provide some good food for a young man, you can certainly take good care of him. But I just love the idea. I'm going to go up to Athens, have a meal, hang out with the coaches, hang out with the players, whatever else. I'm going to do that. But in a lot of ways, Miller reinforces there what a lot of people have believed about him for quite some time, that it's kind of that Georgia-Ohio State battle. But many of you are also pretty confident that maybe Georgia ultimately emerges as the victor in that, and possibly aiding that confidence a little bit is what a guy named Dave Biddle, who covers Ohio State for 24/7 Sports. Biddle was on the Bill King radio show. Bill's a longtime college football talker based out of the Nashville area. Biddle was on Bill King's radio show in Nashville this week, and something that he said about Christian Miller kind of got some attention. Let me set this up this way. So you hear Miller there saying, my two dream schools have been Georgia and Ohio State. A lot of folks have kind of believed that was true. So Biddle, who covers Ohio State, covers, I guess, recruiting in particular, was on with Bill King. And you know how I'll sort of read comments and sometimes I'll phrase questions based on some of the comments that I'm saying. I guess that's what Bill King, the radio host, does with Biddle. He says, hey, so-and-so wants to know about some player out of Myrtle Beach. And honest truth is I wasn't even really all that familiar with the player that he mentioned there. So he's being asked about a recruit out of South Carolina that Ohio State may or may not be recruiting. And Biddle passes on that, but drops a little nugget in on Christian Miller. And, sometimes I just want to make you aware of all the chatter that's out there. So this is Ohio State recruiting expert Dave Biddle on with Bill King on Christian Miller from this week. Some Georgia fans noticed when Biddle said this.
I haven't followed that one too close. I can't give him a very good answer on that one. I'll have to look into that one. I'm more focused on the guys that are going to be signing next week, and really they're only going to be signing two guys. They're not going to sign Christian Miller. He's going to go to Georgia, so I'm not too sure about Montgomery.
So, yeah, I don't even know who the Montgomery guy really is. Maybe some of y'all do know more about that than I do. But in the case of Christian Miller, you hear the Ohio State expert saying, I'm focused on who Ohio State's pursuing. One of those guys is Christian Miller, but they're not going to sign him, and just basically kind of matter-of-fact moving on that. So this is one of those things. I think for the most part, Georgia fans have been fairly confident about Christian Miller, much the same way they were with Ernest Green a few weeks ago when Green ultimately confirmed that he had signed with Georgia back during the early signing period. And one of those big final remaining names is Christian Miller. And you hear the Ohio State guy say, yeah, that guy is going to Georgia. I guess that leaves you wondering, what about Jamar Stewart then? We'll ask Jeff about that tomorrow if anything's changed with Stewart on the heels of his visit to UGA. We'll do that as part of Friday's edition of our program. But for now, that is Around the Doghouse, and it's presented by ServPro. And Listen, always fun to talk about all the big things going on with Serve Pro and the fact that, they really step up to the plate for you and help you when it comes to damage that can be caused by fire, by water intrusions. It's kind of one of those things that happens. The other day, my wife was over there cooking, and this happened, and it's one of those things where like she cooks the steak on the pan and smoke goes everywhere and fire alarm goes off, and you're just kind of reminded, and of course in our case total false alarm. We had a fire alarm at the building the other day where I'm sitting here getting ready to start the show, and you're just kind of getting ready to do whatever. We're literally sitting at the desk getting ready to begin the show, and sure enough, right here in the building, fire alarm goes off, and it's just kind of a reminder how quickly things can happen. And if you have a little bit of fire damage in your house, you have a little bit of water intrusion damage in your house, obviously it's one of those things where figuring out how to get that cleaned up, figuring out how to get that fixed can be kind of a challenging thing. It can be a stressful thing. Well, that's where you want to step up and trust my friends at ServPro, because their restoration specialists can get this cleaned up for you, fixed up for you like it never even happened. Folks show up at your home, they never even know what you dealt with because their folks just worked that hard to get it all back the way that it's supposed to be. If you're watching a video, you see the fleet of trucks and the army of equipment and all the cool stuff they have to get your home back like the damage, the cleanup, like it never even happened. Also, each and every franchise is independently owned and operated. What that means is you're doing business with folks who also have a stake in the outcome. They want to succeed just as much as you want to because they want you to tell a good story about them because this is their business. This is their livelihood on the line each and every time they go to work for you. So check them out online to find out more. It's servpro.com. That's SERV, servpro.com for a lot more on that. Before we're done in today's show, kind of a small thing, but it's still an interesting thing. There is a now former Georgia player, who's getting a decent amount of praise moving into the NFL draft cycle that we're about to be in. And I think what's being said here is pretty instructive. It's the kind of thing I think we ought to pay close attention to. We'll do that. Also, an SEC assistant had kind of a wild social media rant this week. And in one respect, it's gotten a lot of attention, justifiably so. On the other hand, I'm kind of surprised by all of the unanswered questions that this discussion leads us to. So I want to talk about both those things before we're done, and an interesting observation I also had this week about one of Georgia's biggest rivals. So we'll do a lot of that coming up. Before that, though, man, a lot to get into with the aftermath of Jermaine Burton's transfer to Alabama. Obviously, Terence Edwards, we would expect to have a lot to say about that. What's next for UGA at the wide receiver spot, the open wide receiver coaching position, all kinds of bases to cover here. I want to make sure that we do that. It's a Marlowe's Tavern insider update and a great, great guy to have as a part of that, a true Georgia football insider, record-setting player, guy who's close to a lot of the guys who've worn this uniform, and a guy doing big-time work with that next generation of pass-catching targets there as well. So it's going to be Terence Edwards here. Happy to have him and all of you with us on the program today.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Always so great to have Terence Edwards here on DawgNation Daily, and it seems like the wide receiver spot, that's Terence's old position and still the position that he loves coaching up and working with folks on right now. Man, it's just been in the conversation so heavily over the course of these last few weeks. And, Terence, we talked to you last week when Jermaine Burton, your protege, guy that you know very well, was in the transfer portal, and now we know that he's going to Alabama. And, I just want to be as candid with you as I can be. I think I probably fall into the same category of what a lot of Georgia fans kind of fall into, including a former player like McCole Hardman, who kind of looks at it as like, anywhere but Alabama. Go to another SEC school, go do whatever. And, in some respects, you kind of wish you well. Justin Robinson goes to Mississippi State. He's going to play against Georgia next season. For the most part, that doesn't generate much controversy. But when a guy like Burton, who would, if he stayed at Georgia, be one of the top players in the roster next season, when he goes to Alabama, that just kind of generates a little more controversy amongst some, including admittedly myself included. So I want to give you a chance to respond to that part of it. We talked about Burton as a transfer last week, but now we know he's going to what a lot of us view as kind of the arch nemesis Alabama. What do you make of the conversation that's been generated since Burton made that choice?
Well, first and foremost, I understand it. I understand that, Alabama is the big bad beast that we've been trying to get over the hill for a long time, and we finally got over that hill. And, now a young man decides to leave us to go to them, and I could get everyone's sentiment about it. I've said this, and I've been very vocal about Jermaine, and at the end of the day, I tell everybody this. I told this young man when he was in the 8th grade that I've always been on his side, good, bad, and the ugly, and it's not going to change now that he's playing for Alabama. Everyone knows what my loyalty is. I'm a Bulldog through and through, bleed red and black, but my priority and what I've been placed on this earth to do is mentor these kids, starting with him in the 8th grade. And that's what, first and foremost, that I'm going to do regardless of what anybody say, anybody think. I'm going to stand behind him. But at the end of the day, I would cheer for him. If so happens to play Georgia in a SEC championship game, I want Georgia Bulldog to win. I want him to play well, but I want my Dogs to win. So I can understand everyone's frustration with Jermaine and his talent. And I just didn't hear this with Jalen Kimber going to Florida. That is one of our biggest rivals, but no, really, me, Cole, or anyone else didn't have anything to say about that transfer. So, it's these young men's lives. I'm not going to be too upset with what they want to do with their lives. And I tell you this, B.A., this is what I say to all the guys that I mentor. They ask me my opinion. I give them the pros and cons, and I say to them, at the end of the day, it's your life to live. I'm not going to tell you what to do. I'll just give you my advice if you ask. And that's the way I go about it. But I can understand the frustration from a lot of Georgia fans of, we beat the bullies on the block. Now you going to the bullies. So I can get it, but I'm more intimate with it. So I get a little emotional when it comes to guys like Jermaine and Justin and Eric because they've been with me for so long.
And I think that's really important to keep in mind is that, I'm a sports host. We do a sports conversation. I meet a lot of these guys, but I don't know them as deeply personally as you do. And I think you come from the perspective of, hey, loyalty is important. And for a young player like this who, think about all the things that Jermaine or Arik or Justin or any of these guys have heard over the course of their time growing up. Everybody tells them kind of what they want to hear because they want something from them. They want to get their attention. They want them to sign with their letter of intent, whatever else. All the things these guys have been told, and there is this fleeting sense of, hey, I'm on your side as long as you're doing what I want you to do, but the moment you're not, then some of those relationships get severed. I do think it's important for someone like you to be the kind of person, whether it be Jermaine or anybody else, that, hey, I'm going to be on your side no matter what because you're my guy, and the bond that we have is deeper than just a sports thing. Admittedly, I kind of view players like this more as just players who either play on my team or play on my rival. But your relationship with them is a far different thing than that, and I'm at least wise enough to know that's an important thing for these guys to have in their lives.
Oh, most definitely. Most definitely. I try to let them know that when the time that they come train with me, and any guys that, I'm here for more than just football. I've, done a lot in my life. I just know, they would need, at some point in time, they would need someone to be in their corner that's not biased. And I'm not going to be biased with them. Well, I will be biased with unbiased. I just want them to know, no matter what they do, popular or unpopular, that I'm not going to turn my back on them because he's leaving Georgia, my school, and he knows how much I love Georgia.
Yeah.
And none of those guys, Justin either. He knows I spoke with Justin last night. He knows I'm going to be there, win, lose, or draw for him, no matter what. So I can understand. I do understand why it's a big topic with Jermaine, and it's been a week now, so I'm just think the dust has settled. I think the Georgia fans, all of us, can move on and let's start supporting. And I think people are asking about the room already. The room is very talented. We have a lot of guys that can make plays, and I know we're upset with just. Well, let's worry about and talk about the guys that we have. I've been talking about Denylon Marset is a guy that I really, really, really like a lot, and I think Georgia fans is going to be really pleased with him.
No, I think that's really fun to think about. I saw Denylon play at one point this year, had a beautiful touchdown in the game that I saw, and I do think, he played on a very talented team, so you got a chance to kind of see him working with other college-level talents themselves, and sometimes it's a little bit hard for me to tell how senior year of high school translates to first year in college, but there's no doubt the eye test, Denylon kind of passes that. He runs crisp routes, catches the ball well. As I said before, had a beautiful touchdown in the game that we televised for him. I do think he's a big-time prospect for a reason, Terence.
Right, but most definitely. And, he's one of those guys that I call a football player. I wouldn't particularly say he has great straight line speed. He has great natural ability to catch the football, but he's a football player. And I say dog on the outside, where I know the Georgia fans always, make fun of people blocking ability, and he has that. He goes out to dominate, and he's that, that type of junkyard dog back in the day type of football player, a la Hines Ward. I mean, he just a football player is going to do anything it takes to win, and I really like this young man. I like all three guys that we signed. They bring something different to the table, and the C.J. Smith coming out of Florida. You need guys that can run, and him and Arian Smith on the outside to be able to open up the top of the defense. Now with Brock Byers, people are going to try to play him a little different. You need guys who could beat one-on-one coverage, and speed kills. So I'm really excited about the guys that we have, and I'm excited about the guys that are in the room. And we got A.D. Mitchell, we got Ladd, Kieris is coming back. I think Dom is going to be the Dom that we expect him to be. Joe Meeks, like we have talented guys in this room, and the sky's not falling because Jermaine or George is left. Yes, they're talented players, but I really like the room to the way we want to play offense. I think we're going to be just fine.
So I think that's all really well said, and I'm like you. You mentioned the other guys that Georgia signed. I saw Cole Spear play in person this year. I thought he was really a very good athlete there too. And you talk about Chandler Smith, the speed that he brings to the table. We talked about Arian Smith a little earlier before you joined us, and I even said a little earlier this week that because he does have the dimension of when he's healthy, that true breakaway speed, that if Georgia has, I'm talking about a really big breakout season from a guy this year, if he can stay healthy, my candidate to do that is probably Arian Smith, because he was a pretty highly rated recruit coming out of high school. He does have that speed dimension. No disrespect to A.D. Mitchell or Ladd McConkey or any of those guys, but if I got to put a chip down on somebody, I might put mine down on Arian Smith if he can stay healthy, Terence.
Yes, most definitely. That's the biggest question on Arian Smith is, can he stay healthy? We all know he's very talented, and he just brings a dimension that no one else has in that room. Not Jermaine, not George. He can flat out fly. So now you got two guys that are Olympic-type athletes on the edge with C.J. Smith coming in. We might could start up the Smith brothers on the outside.
I like
Maybe
it.
That campaign could be started.
I like it.
But with Kieris coming back, I just really like his veteran leadership. I think that leadership it was on the defense last year with Nakobe Dean, but I think Kieris is a guy that's been there long enough, has helped us win a lot of games. I think he's that guy that could be voice of reason over the whole team, and I really love that he's coming back and could settle everything down, and veteran in that room. That was a big thing outside his talent. Just his veteran presence is another thing that I say we are losing a lot of, not talent, but veteran leadership. And Kieris is a guy that I think can fill that void.
I want to talk to you more about that in a moment, because I think that's a pretty interesting comparison. Let me do something before we get there, though. Last week, a lot of buzz from the conversation we had with you. We talked about the open wide receiver spot there at Georgia, and around here, we're obviously big fans of yours. We would root for you to get any job in the SEC, and eventually I think that if that's the path you want to go, I believe you have a really good chance to do that. But I hope it was gratifying for you to hear so many UGA fans that also think that you'd be great in a role like that. But one way or another, this wide receiver coach conversation continues amongst a lot of fans. You are a part of that. But as Georgia's pursuit kind of continues for its next wide receivers coach, what do you make of where all this stands right now?
First and foremost, let me go ahead and say this, and I appreciate all the true Georgia fans out there that supports me and think I do a great job. Yes, if the call is made and the conversation has been had, I would love to be there. That's my school. I'm entrenched in with these kids. If you check out my social media, even kids that are not from the state of Georgia follow me on social media. And that's just the work that I've put in throughout my academy and coaching kids, and they understand the development that I've been able to help these kids develop. So that's I really appreciate that from the DawgNation. I really do. And whoever the receiver coach is, I just want to have a relationship with them like I had with Coach Hankton. I was able to call Coach Hankton at any point in time. He would call me and ask me about what I think about certain receivers in high school. He would like for me to look at that film and give him my feedback. So I just would like to have that same relationship with whoever the receiving coach is, and and I think that just value my opinion. That's why I love Coach Hankton so much, because he valued my opinion on a lot of guys. So whoever that guy is, I wish it was me. Yes, I would take the job. I would love to be the receiving coach, but if not, then I just hope whoever the receiving coach is, still allows me to call and talk to him about all things Georgia football.
Well, I think a lot of folks around here believe that if it doesn't happen this time, it could happen at some point in time in the future, because that's how effective you've been working with a lot of very good wide receivers. That's a real possibility if that's the path that you want your life to go. And we're big fans of yours around here. We believe that. Another former player that seems to become a part of this conversation a little bit, in addition to yourself and Hines Ward, there's been a little bit of additional chatter as of late about Brian McClendon, who's done some of this kind of stuff. What would you, has experience, what would you make about McClendon's insertion into the conversation?
First, he's a Georgia guy. He's alum as well, just like myself and Hines Ward. And the difference between, myself and Hines is B-Mac has done it. He's been there, done that. He has a reputation of being a great recruiter, a reputation of being a great developer of young men on and off the field. So if that's the guy that Kirby taps to be the next receiver coach, then I know that relationship will continue, because I talk to B-Mac a lot. So I would love for, if it's not me or Hines, I would love for it to be B-Mac as well, another guy that bring the guys back home. He's a proven college coach, and I would be 100% on board with B-Mac, Hines, or myself being in that position.
Yeah, Terence, that's a really cool thing to hear. You made a really cool comparison a moment ago as well. I want to talk to you more about that. But first, let me remind folks, this is our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update with Terence Edwards here right now. Of course, Terence is a UGA insider. He's a football insider, deeply entrenched with players to play the game, coaches. You hear him talk about that on the show each and every week, and you can't quite be that, but you can be a Marlowe's Tavern insider, which is what I am. I'll never be a football insider, but a restaurant insider like Marlowe's Tavern, that's something I can pull off, and you can there as well. In fact, it's really easy to do. You can actually just go to marlowstavern.com and get signed up today, and a big incentive when you do that, how about getting $10 off $30 purchase just for signing up? That's like your own personal NIL deal right there. You go to Marlowe's Tavern, you get signed up to become a member of the Insiders Club, and you're going to get $10 off $30 just for signing up. Then after that, incentives. Every time that you go to Marlowe's Tavern, when you spend at least $15 on food and beverage, you're going to earn yourself a qualified visit. And when you complete 4 qualified visits, you're going to receive a complimentary entree reward up to $20 to redeem on your next visit. That's really cool. You also get really good stuff for your birthday as well. So it's a great chance, great opportunity for you to just get better savings and cool offers and incentives from our friends at Marlowe's Tavern. So download the Marlowe's app or go to marlowstavern.com to become a member of the Marlowe's Tavern Insider Club. So a moment ago, Terence, you talked about Kearis Jackson coming back, and you said that you really feel like that the way in which Nakobe Dean brought that leadership to the defensive side of the ball, that Kearis Jackson can do that on the offensive side of the ball as well. We know he can also be a pretty big-time player for Georgia, too. Had back-to-back 100-yard receiving games going back to the 2020 season, and obviously dealt with some injury a little bit during the 2021 campaign. But I'm really interested to hear more about the kind of leadership you think that a guy like Kearis brings back to this team, especially in comparison to what a guy like Nakobe did for the defense last season.
Most definitely. He's just a well-rounded, respectable guy in that locker room. You've never heard but great things about Kearis. Let's just think about this year. Probably wasn't the season that he thought he would have because he's coming off the scope with the MCL, but he's still able to make plays and do what he's asked to do, and he did it with a smile on his face. So those are the type guys that just come in and just do what he's asked to do with a smile and don't gripe, don't complain. Even when his playing time wasn't as he would want it to be, he would be 100% healthy going into this season, and he could be the guy that led the team in receiving 2 years ago. I think that leadership on and off the field can galvanize this team, because I tell people all the time, it's not the talent that we lost that I'm worried about. It's just the leadership that I'm worried about. Can we replace that talent? Kirby's doing a great job replacing talent and bringing in talent. But talent and leadership are two different things. So I'm just worried about who's going to be that voice. And Kearis is one of those guys that I think is a voice. Nolan Smith is another one that's coming back. That's a voice. Chris Smith. So we do have some leaders, but more has to step up. I think Kirby said it best. It was a lot of leaders in that locker room that made this team so special.
Terence, that's really good stuff. Thank you so much for being here as a part of our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update right now. And, of course, you are doing great work with those wide receivers. Remind folks how they can get in touch with your wide receiver academy, too.
B, I'm going to call you out right now before I go. Can we please get that picture? We need to get an updated picture of me once I come on. All
right, let me see.
Let's come take one in the studio. We got to do something.
All right, let me see the picture. Hold on. I'll put it back up here, Michael, because I don't know that I've paid close attention. Michael Carvel's our producer today. Let me see the picture here that Terence – oh, okay, so Terence unhappy with that. We got to get you a better picture. All right. So, I mean, first of all, I feel like you look handsome in the picture. You got the SEC gear on. You got the Georgia gear on. But are you just ready for something a little bit more updated?
You know what? I'm gonna do? I'm gonna see some gear with my Georgia 2021 national champion.
I like it.
Gear on.
I like it.
So
Let's do that.
That's what I'm gonna do.
So I gotta confess one thing to you, Terence. Still about calling me out. So my Twitter picture is still the same thing from like 2015. Like I've aged so much since then. Like there are a lot of people that probably think of me as like this like really young guy that don't realize that I'm actually in my 40s now, and what is that, 7 years removed. So I haven't changed my Twitter picture in 7 years. My wife gives me grief. I don't really go on Facebook very much. I think my Facebook like header picture is from back when I only had one child. And so I've only got one child in my picture. My daughter's now going on 7 years old herself. So, so I'm not always the best at updating some of these pictures. But for you, we will get your picture updated here.
I appreciate it. And for all that's looking to get their kids trained, the bubble work is in effect right now. Actually, we have a session tonight at from 6 to 7:30. You can find me on all social media. That's Terence Edwards, Wide Receiver Academy.
Terence, great stuff. Thanks so much. Appreciate you being here for our Marlowe's Tavern Insider Update. Have a great week, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
Thank you.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
So you've heard me say it a million times before, like, there are certain things that we're not going to really pretend to be objective about, and Terence Edwards is not really one of those things. I just think Terence is just a really good dude, and there's no better example of that than this. If you ask him about the wide receiver position, hey, he does not shy away from the fact of, I'd like to have that job. And listen, there are certain jobs in my life, if you ask me about them in a candid, private conversation, yeah, I'd like to have that job too. That there are just certain things like that where you just sort of, I'm not leaving DawgNation Daily, but the point is that there are certain things that you're not going to lie about. If somebody asks you about it, yeah, that'd be a kind of a cool job to have. And Terence Edwards says, I work with wide receivers. I've given my life to this position, to the sport of football. If I had a chance to serve as Georgia's wide receivers coach, of course I would want that job. So credit to Terence for being that candid, that honest. But also listen to this. He does not skip a beat to say, but if it ends up being a guy like Brian McClendon, totally support him. If it were to end up being a guy like Hines Ward, I'll totally support him. If it'll end up being some outside of the program, Terence says, I'd like to have that relationship I had with Cortez Hankton where we're kind of chopping it up and talking about players and things like that. But Terence Edwards, on the one hand, is kind enough to be honest with us. Of course, I'd like to have the job. But on the other hand, showing support for whoever does get that job. And I just think that's really cool. I just think that's a really, really nice thing. And it's one of the things that we like about, a lot of these guys who, stay close and connected to the Georgia program is that clearly they have their own personal ambitions, and who wouldn't, but they also have that desire to see their alma mater be as good as it can possibly be. That is a really, really nice thing, and I hope that we don't ever discount any of that. All right, we got a couple of interesting stories for our SEC through, so let me remind you that we're cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Boy, what a great time to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship here in 2022 and taking advantage of all of the onboard amenities that all these ships are so famous for, whether you're going out of, like, say, Harmony of the Seas, which right now is sailing out of Port Canaveral, or you're talking about Odyssey of the Seas, one of those great-looking ships that's sailing out of Fort Lauderdale. Just some of the stuff that you see on the and we will show the video each and every day. It's so much fun, so amazing. Whether it be like the Ultimate Abyss, the tallest slide at sea, the really, really cool stuff when you go to Perfect Day Coco Cay and you see that helium balloon that takes you several hundred feet in the air. all just the really amazing things. There's specialty restaurants on board. You know, the dining situation on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship right now is so much fun because you've got all these different specialty restaurants you can choose from. Some of the ships have Playmakers Sports Bar, which is kind of a fun thing to be watching sports. I mean, I remember when I first started going on cruise ships, you know, decades ago, it was not always the easiest thing to even watch sports at sea. You know, back then it was just always a little bit of a tricky way of how you even did that. But now you've got all of that sports right there in front of you. A lot of these ships have Playmaker Sports Bar and arcade, which is really, really fun. Of course, you got, you know, Chops, the steakhouse, and all kinds of just really fun specialty dining opportunities and just really fun stuff. So great time to be on a Royal Caribbean cruise ship, and 2022 is the year to do it. And when we say Royal Caribbean around here, we want you to book that cruise with someone who's going to be able to give you the tips and tricks to make your vacation as fun as it can possibly be. That's where the Cruise and Vacation Authority comes in. You can find them online, tcava.com. That's tcava.com. Or 770-952-8300. 770-952-8300. That's the number. They're UGA grads, dog fans, and Royal Caribbean experts. What better way to get on board for a Royal Caribbean cruise here in 2022 than with our friends at the Cruise and Vacation Authority. All right, I want to do a couple of things here, and we talked about this on SEC Country Live yesterday, and I find this whole thing to be relatively odd for a couple of reasons. So Antonio Cromartie, you know him, a former NFL defensive back, prolific procreator, and also assistant coach, cornerbacks coach at Texas A&M. And Cromartie had quite the rant on Twitter this week that, on the one hand, has gotten a lot of attention. On the other hand, I still don't quite feel like it's been talked about maybe as much as it should. Let me show you what Cromartie put on Twitter. I believe we have this. So he says, man, this NIL stuff is crazy. Now kids are worried about everybody else's pockets, meaning the money other people are making. How about this? Worry about taking care of the things on the field first, and everything else will follow, Cromartie says, because if you're not productive on the field or in the classroom, you're not going to see that money. So he says, worry about you. Then he goes on to say, I hope with everyone's family looking for a big payday from these NIL deals, they're getting the financial education they need. He says, if y'all are paying these marketing companies 25 to 30% of what you make and then getting taxed at 36%, you're not making any money, he says. That's over 50% of your money that's gone right there. Then he finally says this, and just know those marketing agents want their money before taxes, just like the government does. So I find that to be really interesting with Cromartie on a number of fronts. And one of the things that he brings up there at the end, kind of some frustration with some of the marketing companies, and I don't think this can be discounted, that we are entering into a world in college football now where we're going from the coaches having influence over the players to now the marketing company, so to speak, having influence over the players. And why I think that's potentially worse is because we know who the coach is. If Antonio Cromartie does wrong by one of his Texas A&M defensive backs, that's Cromartie's reputation that's on the line, or any other assistant coach in the SEC or head coach in the SEC. We know who these guys are. We know where to find them. A lot of these marketing companies operate in a much more stealth type way, and we don't really know who they are. You know, we don't really know, you know, the names behind the companies from time to time. So I think what Cromartie brings up here is, who are these representatives now that are stepping up to try to supposedly make money for these players, and at what cost does all that go down? And I think that Cromartie's kind of opening up a pretty important conversation there. A lot of what Cromartie says I think is at least worth considering. But the number one way in which all of this is going to be received is from the people who are pretty suspicious of Texas A&M. A&M does have the number one class right now in the 2022 recruiting cycle, and I guess there's a chance if Harold Perkins comes back to A&M, right now he's decommitted, we talked about that a little earlier, there's still a chance that A&M could have the highest rated class of all time, right? In the composite era at 24/7 Sports, that A&M could not only have the number one class this year, but the highest composite class of all time. And the suspicion here is that a lot of this has come because of A&M's willingness to leverage NIL deals for its recruits. There was the message board post on an Oklahoma board a couple of weeks ago that got a lot of attention. Typically speaking, I think of the kind of modern college football fan is pretty savvy. The kind of person that watches a show like this just knows what's what on the internet. Most people have the wherewithal to recognize the difference between crazy random message board poster, clout chaser on social media, and then actual substantive report that matters. Most college football fans kind of know the difference. However, the other day, this message board poster was talking about Texas A&M paying $25 or $30 million to its 2022 signing class, and even went into specific detail, according to his own perspective or own expertise, about how it was that A&M was doing that. This is one of those rumors, message board type things that got taken pretty seriously, so much so that Ross Bjork, who's the A&M athletic director, was actually asked about this in an interview with the Houston Chronicle and totally denied the whole thing, that no, they're not paying $30 million, he says, to the 2022 signing class. But Jimbo Fisher back in December did acknowledge that, yeah, they are trying to embrace the NIL era. And so that's why some of this conversation takes place. So there are a lot of people who see Cromartie kind of flipping out about what. We don't even really know what this is even in relationship to. It's clearly a subtweet of something. We don't really know what it is. There are a lot of people who look at Cromartie here and they're like, wow, is this house of cards already crumbling? Is this foundation already showing itself to be quicksand? That the NIL giveth and the NIL taketh away, that there's already a little bit of trouble on that. And here's the other thing. While it's kind of an interesting conversation started to hear Cromartie saying these things, I'm also sort of amazed that it's not generating more buzz than it is. Can you imagine if a Georgia assistant coach said this? We'd have to do 75 shows on who it is that he's talking about, what all this means. It's just really weird how, the SEC geographic footprint's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's just really weird how the far west version of the SEC in College Station, soon to be Norman, soon to be Austin, it's just different than it is over here. Forget Georgia for a moment. If a Tennessee assistant said this, it'd just be wall-to-wall news. Florida assistant, Alabama assistant, Auburn assistant. It'd just be wall-to-wall news. But somehow a A&M assistant coach goes on a rant that makes him sound more like a fan than a coach, and yet, tweet doesn't get deleted, still up there, and everybody just kind of shrugs it off and moves on. It's just really weird to me how different the other side, I don't mean the SEC West, I mean the far west geographic side of the SEC. It's just very weird how different that bunch is compared to over here, because I can guarantee you this, if keep it in the same position. If Jamal Adai said this on Twitter, we'd be doing a 6-hour show right now trying to figure out what all this was about. But somehow over there, it's just kind of, par for the course. It's just a little bit strange. Speaking of strange, I also thought this was strange too. We'll try to pick up the pace here just a little bit, which seems like I say that now every show. But nonetheless, so Derek Mason is now, I still don't think it's quite official yet, but it's on its way to being official that he's going to be Oklahoma State defensive coordinator. He's definitely leaving Auburn. Auburn's already announced his replacement, but he's going to Oklahoma State. And so I just kind of wanted to get a little bit more insight into how this was being received at Auburn. So I went to one of the Auburn message boards, and the thing that made me go to the message board was I have no reason to believe that Mason got fired. Don't believe that he did, nor do I think that Brian Harsin wanted him to leave. It seems like Mason is leaving of his own choosing. So the thing that I wanted to see is how Auburn fans felt about that. Were they sad that Mason was leaving? Were they saying good riddance, scapegoating him for some of the failures this past season? I just wanted to see what the reaction was. And so when I went to the message board, and maybe you've been to an Auburn message board, you've seen this for yourself, I couldn't find hardly any posts about it. I was scrolling a couple of pages here, and the entirety of the posts were about the basketball team. Now, listen, I do realize that Auburn is the number one team in the country. I totally realize that. But I was actually really surprised to see how much this particular Auburn message board was fixated on Bruce Pearl taking the Louisville job, which has been rumored, or what Katie Johnson's doing for the Auburn team, or just the fact that Auburn's number one in basketball. That's a pretty big accomplishment. It's a pretty big deal. No one denies that. But I was amazed at how much the chatter was. And you see on the screen it says, "Is Auburn a basketball school now?" I'm somewhat joking when I say that, but I got to think if Georgia was number one in basketball, which is almost an unforeseeable situation, you almost can't imagine that ever being true. But I got to think that the football conversation would still be a little more prolific than it seems to be around Auburn right now. And when you look at, we talked on yesterday's show about Brian Harsin kind of being on the hot seat. ESPN has suggested that. To me, this is part of the indication of that if you go to a message board, even if Bruce Pearl's got the Tigers playing, number one basketball, if you're not even having a football conversation right now, that's not the way that it's supposed to be. Yeah, talk about basketball as much as you want if the team's number one, but the football conversation should be happening too. And the basketball conversation, maybe it really is commensurate with the number one team. But the football conversation, at least what I can tell, is non-existent right now. I mean, a lot of you know Auburn fans in your own life. In fact, a lot of you tell me that all the time, that based on where you live, Columbus area, LaGrange, places like that, that West Georgia corridor down there, that Auburn, to a lot of you, is your biggest rival because you have a bunch of Auburn people who are always yapping. Are they yapping right now? Have you heard anything from Auburn people about anything? Zero recruiting buzz. Zero excitement for the most part about players currently on the team. Brian Harsin totally disconnected from the kind of passion we typically expect to see from an SEC fan base. I find that to be a little weird, a little unusual right now. And I guess the other thing that I would mention here is that, I mean, like, how much of a basketball school would Georgia be if Georgia was number one in basketball? Would we be talking about basketball here each and every day? Some of you complain if we talk about basketball at all. Like, I wonder how much things would change for UGA if the basketball team was having as much success as the Auburn team is having right now. I don't know. It's one of those things where I spent a little time on that message board yesterday, and it just kind of got me a little curious about just how quickly Auburn seems to have put football aside now that the basketball team is winning some games. One final SEC through story to get to here for a moment. So obviously Jamar Chase playing in the AFC Championship game this weekend for the Cincinnati Bengals, going to Kansas City. And one of the things that Chase said this week that motivates him as a player is the fact that at one point in time, former LSU coach Les Miles told him he couldn't be a wide receiver at LSU. And a lot of folks talk about this, how wrong Les Miles got it, and clearly he did. Chase was a Biletnikoff Award winner in college. He'd been a great player in the NFL at that position too. But I think a lot of folks do kind of forget this. And this is one of those things that might be somewhat instructive for Georgia fans to keep in mind too, is that while Miles clearly got it wrong when he said that Chase wasn't good enough to play at LSU, the fact of the matter is Jamar Chase was not nearly as highly rated a recruit as you might think for someone who had the success that he had at LSU and now as a first-round pick of the Cincinnati Bengals. He was top 100-ish. I think he was 84th in the country as a player, was a four-star, but not a at one point in time, Jamar Chase was probably going to TCU. There was a moment back during his signing class where it seemed like that his college future was at a place like TCU. No disrespect to the Horned Frogs, but that's not the kind of place that great wide receivers typically go, but that's kind of where he was going for a while, and then eventually had a chance to join the LSU class. And then once he got his wagon hitched to Joe Burrow and Joe Brady, the rest is history. It may have been the greatest college offense of all time, and Chase was a big part of that. The point I'm getting to is this, is that for Georgia, they're looking right now for a somewhat similar success story. Maybe not quite as prolific as Jamar Chase turned out to be, but taking someone who may have been a four-star, but not quite the top 30 player in the country, five-star type guy, and find some success for them. And I think one of the things that you should take a little bit of comfort in is there probably are more examples of this. Justin Jefferson's a little bit like that. Chris Olave from Ohio State's a little bit like that. Jamar Chase was still a highly rated recruit, but not as highly related as some of the other wide receivers in the SEC that we've talked about here in the past. That there is a little bit, for whatever reason, seemingly a pathway for less than elite level recruits who go on to have elite level success. And so when you think about breakout names for Georgia, it doesn't have to be necessarily the five-star variety to provide that opportunity for you. That maybe, even if it's not Biletnikoff type stuff the way that Jamar Chase was, a bigger horizon in store for some of these future Georgia wide receivers, maybe that's a possibility there as well. Maybe the Jamar Chase story gives you a little bit of hope for that. We'll make it cruise around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, let me turn my attention now fully back to the Georgia Bulldogs here for a moment. And I'm going to go back in time just because it's kind of a cool piece of audio to relive. Let's go back to March here for a moment. John Fitzpatrick, Georgia tight end, was talking about the work that's being done in the early stages of spring practice, and Fitzpatrick at the time talking about why Georgia was putting that in. The skull session meetings they were having, the practices on the field they were having, all of the work that was being done almost a full year from where we are sitting and talking right now. And in light of what Georgia accomplished, going back and hearing Fitzpatrick is kind of cool. So let me let you hear this, then I'm going to build off that after it. This is John Fitzpatrick from last March. Let's get John Fitzpatrick here.
We're just excited, and we're eager, and we're hungry. We all have a bunch of experience, I feel like, and we just want to use that experience. And we don't want to be, sitting there watching when it comes to January. We want to be playing in those games.
How cool is that to hear John Fitzpatrick say, hey, we're doing all this right now because when January comes around, we don't want to be watching the playoff on TV. We want to be there. We want to be in it. And that's exactly how it worked out. Fitzpatrick, a big part of a team that won the Orange Bowl in the national semifinal, won the national championship against the hated foe that is the Alabama Crimson Tide, and all the work that was done January, February, into March last year, turning into spring practice, all of that results in a national championship. What a success story, and John Fitzpatrick kind of called his own shot for that when you want to go back to last year. The reason why I bring up John Fitzpatrick is because as Fitzpatrick now turns the page to the next chapter in his football life, knowing that he is a national champion and no one can take that away from him, the success story may not be quite done quite so soon for him because Lance Zierlein, who is a NFL draft analyst for the NFL Network and NFL.com, had quite an interesting tweet this week, and I want to make sure you see this for Fitzpatrick, who's now moving on to the NFL, saying, this is what Zierlein says on Twitter. He says, if you're a geek for trench play, watch Georgia tight end John Fitzpatrick block for their running game. Zierlein says that he single-handedly helped several runs versus Auburn. He's rarely talked about, but a future NFL Y tight end, that means the position letter, who's going to get after you at the point of attack. How nice is that to hear? And we said this before when Fitzpatrick declared for the NFL, that it would not be a surprise to us at all if he goes on to make himself a lot of money playing for a long time in that league because he is 6'7". He's got the big frame to look for the football, but also he is a very accomplished blocker. And you see a guy like Charlie Warner. How well set up is Warner going to be financially because of the blocking that he's doing right now for the San Francisco 49ers? And Terence Edwards, when he joined us a moment ago, kind of referenced this of that people joke when it comes to UGA fans and blocking and all of that, and I realize that becomes a source of frustration. But I think the Fitzpatrick story tells us something. It tells us something really important, that there are a lot of football players in the Georgia roster that we have talked about on a show like this a lot more than we've talked about John Fitzpatrick. But a lot of those guys we have talked about more than Fitzpatrick won't end up making maybe as much money as he's going to make at the NFL level, that the conversation on a show like this gravitates a little bit more towards the sizzle and maybe a little bit less away from the steak. But that's not how actual football really works. That football at its essence is still more about workhorses than it is show ponies. And I just think it's kind of important for us to remember that the thing that made Georgia a national championship team, for as much as we fixate on famous player this and famous player that, ultimately it's a lot of folks who are willing to do what John Fitzpatrick was willing to do. Be tough, be physical, block, do the things that don't necessarily get you recognized on DawgNation Daily very much, but earn you a paycheck at the NFL. So if you ask John Fitzpatrick, hey, what would you rather had? A little more attention from shows like DawgNation Daily, or that check signed by whatever team owner coming to you, 17 times during the fall? I'm guessing the NFL paycheck's going to feel pretty good to him. And for a lot of folks who joke about all the blocking that Georgia asked certain players to do, that blocking opened up a lot of holes along the way to a national championship this season, and a lot of opportunities for guys to also go on and get paid at the NFL level, which ultimately is the name of the game for a lot of the folks in a conversation like this. So nice to see Fitzpatrick getting that attention from the NFL Network ahead of the conversation around the NFL draft after contributing to a national championship season for Georgia. Hey, one more quick shout out before we sign off here today. Classic City Lager. It's just good cold beer. You talk about fundamentals, blocking and tackling. That's what Classic City Lager kind of is too. Doing the hard work necessary to make a beer taste great for you. And you really don't get that unless you're talking about folks who just love it. They love the beer. That's what craft beer is ultimately about, right? It's about people who dedicate themselves to the craft of making beer. That's where the word craft even comes from. These are people that are into it. They're connoisseurs. They know what they like. They have learned what we like, and they take great pride and pleasure in delivering that with each and every can. Classic City Lager is just good cold beer. It's a lager-style beer. Sometimes you don't think of lager-style beers in kind of the craft family, but that's one of the reasons why Creature Comforts wanted to do that. They wanted to put their own spin on something that's been a part of the American diet forever. The lager-style beer, that's been an American staple for a long time, and this is Creature Comforts' take on all of that. So if you haven't tried a Classic City Lager from Creature Comforts Brewing Company, it's the time to do it. Or as you're getting ready for some football this weekend and little Torrey Pines, how about a little golf? Dogs on Tour there at Torrey Pines. Don't forget, it's a Wednesday through Saturday for the PGA Tour this week. Whatever sports you're watching here this weekend, Classic City Lager goes great with it from Creature Comforts Brewing Company. It is simply good, cold beer. So why don't you try some out today? All right, golden shoe to give away. And I'm always glad when our golden shoes submitters give credit to where they got it from, because let's face it, a lot of these memes just get stolen on the internet and they get passed around, and who knows what. Some of the things that I've created have been now passed around 1,000 times, and that's just the way the internet works. So when somebody gives credit, cites their source, I'm always a little happy about that. Let me give a golden shoe out today to someone who did just that. Jerry Dogs fan says, I stole this from Eugene Ledbetter, LOL. And what it is, for those of you listening, radio podcast, it's Nick Saban with the crying Jordan face. And instead of saying Nick Saban, it says Nick Saban. So Jerry Dog fan, thanks for sharing this. Eugene Ledbetter, thanks for making it. Really funny, very good, and certainly worthy of a golden shoe here today. Lousy, stinking Gators. Boy, long time since that poverty program has won a national championship. How about 4,767 days? And they're going to lose again to Georgia 275 days from right now. That is our Gator Hater Countdown. This is DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp, and we will see you again tomorrow. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down, where R.S. Andrews is the one you turn to for your air conditioning, your heating, your plumbing, and electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price that's promised. That is what R.S. Andrews can do for you. So find them online at rsandrews.com. Water heater, if it goes out, in many cases, R.S. Andrews can replace it for you the same day. That's peace of mind for you, that you don't have to worry about taking cold showers or worry about the people in your house taking cold showers, because goodness knows you're going to be hearing about that if they do. So check out R.S. Andrews online at rsandrews.com for a lot more on that. All right, let's get in here and get some comments, and let's just kind of see how everybody's doing. So we went very long on comments yesterday. We'll probably go sort of medium length today, and then we'll get out of here. Hope you're doing well. Let's do DawgNation YouTube first. Now, YouTube's been a little bit of a cesspool lately, and I say that lovingly, but we'll see if they're on topic today. Robert Barnes on Buster Faulkner. Yeah, so I think that Robert's onto something, that whether it's Terence Edwards or Hines Ward, that neither one of these guys plan on going anywhere, that Georgia may be in a situation now where it feels like it needs the experienced wide receivers coach. And, from a position of strength in the future, maybe you can dip into what is a little bit more of a non-traditional role. Hiring a coach who's taking his first coaching job, or hiring a guy like Ward who kind of traveled the path of great former player and worked his way up to coaching ranks, that you may be more in a position to do this later than you might think of yourself as being right now. I think Robert's maybe on to something about that. We even kind of alluded to that yesterday. In the case of Buster Faulkner, who has been a coach, and I would say pretty successful. Being offensive coordinator at Southern Miss is not a small job necessarily. I think he's been pretty good. He's clearly viewed as pivotal, I believe, in the recruitment of Arch Manning. You can't discount that. So I would say that Buster Faulkner does have a pretty big future in coaching. I'm assuming that's going to happen on the Georgia staff. If I had to guess, he is, and this is just a guess, that he's maybe not a on-field coach in the 2022 season, but maybe by the 2023 season he could be. If I had to guess, that might be where this is going. Let's see what else. DMart42 says McClendon would be welcome on the recruiting trail. Not sure where he'd fit in. I definitely think that McClendon's shown an ability to recruit. I've mentioned Josh Vann a couple times, but he's also probably instrumental in getting Marshawn Lloyd to come to South Carolina as well. I mean, South Carolina's not exactly been the most talented team when McClendon was on that staff, but he was a guy that helped them get some recruiting wins while he was there. So he has a history of winning with some of these battles. Jose Cruz says, do you think that Branson Robinson is going to be a starter? If I had to guess, not year one, but Will he get a chance to show what he's all about? Maybe so. And will he, emerge? And template here may be like, say, DeAndre Swift as a freshman in 2017. Swift wasn't a starter back then. Guys like Chubb and Michelle were getting the most carries, but Swift was really important, and ultimately it was DeAndre Swift who had the touchdown in the 2017 SEC championship game that ended any chance of an Auburn comeback. And so that may be an interesting blueprint for what a guy like Branson Robinson may be able to do this year. Jordan Bowman says Clemson's out on Arch. I did see some chatter about that. Glad we weren't dragged along and the Manning family was transparent. Yeah, I guess that's the thing. Yeah, if you're not going to get the guy, then you kind of move on. I also saw where Ole Miss just offered a new quarterback. I don't know if that's to be taken to mean they're no longer in the Arch Manning sweepstakes either, but it's going to heat up on the Arch thing pretty heavily. That's going to heat up, I would say, pretty quick as the weather starts to get a little bit warmer. So I did see where I guess the relationship is now over between Arch and Clemson. So we'll find out. Is it Georgia, Alabama, LSU? Is that what it turns out to be? Is Ole Miss truly out of it? Is it really those three down to the wire? And kind of, I guess Texas. You have to include Texas in that too, I guess, and maybe Texas ahead of anybody else other than Georgia. William Perry says we need to keep Buster Faulkner happy. We need him when Monken leaves. It could be that simple. Maybe Buster really is the guy that's being groomed to eventually take over for Todd Monken. I mean, this is one of those things that Alabama has had some success with, that they have kind of an offensive framework in place and coordinators come in and essentially kind of run the same thing. Now, when the Atlanta Falcons tried that with Kyle Shanahan's offense, it didn't work quite so well. Steve Sarkisian trying to run the Shanahan offense, that didn't really work too well. But for Alabama, for the most part, it seems like it's kind of worked, where you've had, offensive system in place, and when you change these coordinators, they're not changing the offense every time they come in. They are adapting to what already exists. And so maybe Georgia trying to maintain some continuity with system, even if it's not continuity with coordinator, that could be a recipe for success for Georgia as well. Baggins and Friends says, Hines Ward could teach the wide receivers to be physical. He was a beast. Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty good point, Baggins, that Ward, when he played at Georgia, about blocking, he may have been the best blocker in the entire team. He was just like Hines, one of those guys, kind of a low center of gravity. He just packs a wallop. He just has always been this tough, physical guy. Like pound for pound, and hear what I'm saying, don't hear what I'm not saying. He played quarterback, he played running back, he played wide receiver, he was a good blocker. Pound for pound, he may have been among the best football players, maybe the best football player to play at Georgia in terms of all the different things he could do, like punt, pass, and kick type deal. I mean, he may have just been he won a game at quarterback, rushed for 100 yards at tailback. I believe that was at Alabama, game that Georgia lost, but he played tailback. Wide receiver, you know what he did there. Could have just played however many positions on the field. He was just that good. And so if you were to think about, Hines being involved in a Georgia program, that's kind of one of the things you think about is, hey, if you're a receiver and you're not attracted to what Hines Ward did well at Georgia, then you may not be a good fit for this program. In other words, to go back to the whole idea of workhorses versus show ponies, that if Hines Ward worked too hard for you, then that may be a sign that Georgia's not a good place for you, not a good fit for you. That may be true. Scott Boland says something tells me that Bama may be a better run organization than the Falcons. Scott, touche. You may be quite correct on that. David Botter says Hines has grit. That's a good way to say it. He was a gritty, tough dude. He says he was mean. He really was, man. I saw him lay a couple of licks on blocks. Now, a lot of this stuff probably not even allowed anymore, blindside, whatnot. But, boy, did he lay lumber. He really did. Thomas Tyson says Bobo would be a great quarterback coach. I'd prefer him not to call plays. I think the Bobo version we've seen the last couple of years, what he was at Auburn, what he was at South Carolina, maybe some of what he even was at Colorado State, although I didn't really watch many of those games. I think that version of Bobo is a little more conservative now than what maybe he was at one point in time. That, by the end of his tenure there at Georgia, Georgia was actually running the ball a pretty good bit. And, he was one of the few guys in the SEC probably that was even doing any kind of huddling at all, traditional huddle, running a little slower pace. Bobo was just a little bit different version of himself now than maybe what he was early in his career. If you had to guess, maybe that's true. JD says BA's whole Kiffin, Saban, Smart love triangle conspiracy is childish, he says. Thanks for weighing in on that. And as I've said before, go back and read Ross Dellinger's piece. Let me see if I can find this. I'm not making this up from thin air. Hold on. Let me see if I can find this. Okay, so this was the day of the national championship game. Ross Dellinger, respected writer, Sports Illustrated. It says the subhead for the story, once trusted confidants, quote, there is no love lost now between the SEC coaches, a former player says. I told you this months ago. Ross Dellinger wrote this a few weeks ago. The stuff that I say on the show don't make up out of thin air, that I'm not just pulling this out of nowhere. I'd invite you to read the story that yourself, and you can decide after that if I'm childish, but it's not like I'm just pulling this stuff out of nothing. But thanks for weighing in. Wally Smith says Brock Vandagriff for the starting job. I hope he gets consideration. I hope for all the young players who are here that there is consideration given to them. Listen, I think Stetson Bennett's hard to beat out. Won a national championship. I think he played better than, for the most part, he's been given credit for. But while he is hard to beat out, guys like Brock and Carson should get their chance, I believe, to do that. Let's go to Facebook here for a moment. On Facebook. Barry Watkins checks in to say about the Bobo talk. Yeah, Bobo's always generated a lot of conversation, and Barry brings up Drew Bobo there. And much the same way I think that Will Muschamp probably enjoyed Athens last year. Now, he ended up being in a bigger role than he signed on to be on. But when your son's a member of the team, and when you got family members just kind of on the staff, kind of a cool place to be. I think that Muschamp really enjoyed his time last year at UGA. Ultimately got deputized into a little bit more substantial duty, but I think just to begin with, I think he liked the idea of receding to the background a bit, and maybe for Mike Bobo to be on the same campus that his son's on and be a part of a program with guys like Muschamp and Kirby are legitimately friends with Mike Bobo. I'm guessing that's probably a pretty fun life, that you've had the stress of being a head coach, you've had the attention of being an offensive coordinator at a few different spots. How about just kind of let somebody else get the criticism for a change? I'm sure that's probably a pretty good deal for a guy like that once you had your chance to do that. I've said this before, that I have a lot of friends who are coaches, things like that at the high school level, and they always kind of fantasize about, hey, after a few more years being a head coach, because honestly, you want the salary that comes from being a head coach, and competitive fire makes you want to be the lead guy. But there are a lot of guys who just don't want to do that forever. They want to do it as long as they can to get the money they feel like they need and satisfy that itch. But then going and being an assistant coach on one of their friend staffs and let that head coach deal with the parents and deal with the administration and deal with all the headaches that go along with that, and just come out there and talk ball every day and work with players, the kind of things that coaches generally like doing. There are a lot of guys that like the idea of that and not having to deal with all the headaches of being a head coach. I'm guessing there are a lot of college guys who may be the same way. Let me see what else. Matt Rugvina says, why are people so longing for the 9-3 Belk Bowl Mike Bobo to be offensive coordinator? I don't know that anybody's doing that. I think the conversation around Bobo right now is as an analyst, being at Georgia in a off-field coaching capacity. But I will say this, though, and this is one of those things where I just think honesty compels you to admit. If you want to go back to Bobo's last year at Georgia, his final year at offensive coordinator at Georgia was 2014. If you look at scoring offense, Georgia led the SEC in scoring at 41.3 points per game. Next closest team was Alabama at 36.9 points per game. So Georgia had a by far more prolific offense than anybody else in the SEC that year. And if you want to look at, let's just look at yards per play here for a moment. If you look at yards per play, once again, Georgia led the SEC in yards per play in 2014 at 6.79. Now, that's not an NFL quarterback. Hudson Mason was the quarterback on that team. This is post-Aaron Murray. Now, you had, obviously, Chubb, Michelle, and Todd Gurley, so that certainly helped. But the point is, they utilized those guys really well, too. And they didn't have really all of them together for very much during the season. So while I don't certainly tout Mike Bobo as offensive coordinator right now, I think that Georgia's got itself a good one in Todd Monken. If you want to go back and relitigate the Bobo era, I think it was certainly more good than bad. And all of this is pre-DawgNation. DawgNation didn't start until 2015, so Bobo was already gone when DawgNation started. But pre-DawgNation, I was more supportive of Bobo than not. Now, obviously, there are frustrations when you don't run the ball with Gurley at the goal line against South Carolina and things like that. That's not a good decision. That's a bad decision. But overall, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. If you're the best offense in the SEC, points scored and yards per play, you're clearly doing something right. And like a lot of the losses that Georgia took that year were not necessarily Bobo's fault. So, yeah, that's just something to consider. Chad Williams says there were a lot of people that wanted to see Bobo succeed Rick. I don't remember that as much. Maybe that was true. I mean, the one thing I always felt like is that Bobo was grossly underpaid. Now, if you go back and change that, then everything else after, it's sort of like the space-time continuum and Back to the Future. Everything now is different because of the change you made. But what if, Bobo was making about $500,000 as offensive coordinator at Georgia at a time in which other offensive coordinators were making over $1 million. You had Chad Morris at Clemson, places like that, where offensive coordinators were getting very, very big salaries, and Bobo was, by comparison, making about half what they made. And it was always really frustrating to me that, Bobo goes to become head coach at Colorado State, and people say, well, of course you're going to leave and go be a head coach. I mean, what if he was making $1 million? Maybe he would have reconsidered not doing that. But the point is that Bobo leaves, and they bring in Brian Schottenheimer, who is inferior to Bobo in every way possible, and they paid him like $900,000. Like, if you just paid Bobo $900,000, maybe he's not leaving to go to Fort Collins. So that's one of those things. Barry Watkins says Bobo is quarterback for the Dogs. He's part of DawgNation. He was also a really good quarterback, too. 97, Georgia. Bowl record of, consecutive completions against Wisconsin? Is that the bowl record that he has? For sure. Santi Arnold, that's very nice of you to say. I appreciate that. It's very nice of you to say. Rick Martin on the subject of the Bobo McGarity thing. Yeah, you certainly hear a lot of stories about that. Gerald Herman says y'all need to do a show talking about all the quarterbacks that played at Georgia from the 90s into the 2000s until now. Yeah, it is an interesting lineage of quarterbacks for sure. There are a lot of stories around one of those guys for sure. For sure. Keith Fold showing his support for Terence Edwards. I'd love to see that. Let's see what else. Somebody mentioned my scarf. Michael Carvel, why don't you show your scarf off? So Michael got himself a scarf. Now, this scarf I don't believe you can buy. This was a gift. I don't believe this is for sale. But Michael Carvel, our producer, bought his own scarf, and it's very nice. Michael, yeah, thank you very much. So I wanted to show this off. This is an unbelievably cool scarf. And I'm sure that's one of those things you can order online and get 12 weeks from now. So it says 2022 national champions. I'm sorry, I'm covering up my face, making it dark. You got the Georgia G on both sides of that. You turn around to the other side. You got the Georgia spelled out here, and the Indy and the date on the other side. That's a cool scarf right there. Now, this one you can buy, and I'm sure there's links everywhere to be able to buy it. This is not an advertisement, but you can do that. I think that's really cool. Really cool. So that's our buddy Michael Carvel's scarf right there. Very, very nice. But this one I don't think you can buy. But that one I believe you can. Or I know you can because Michael did buy it. Bill Kelly says, anybody else still celebrating the national championship? You better believe that's the case. You better believe that's the case. Also, you scroll back up here, there's all these comments about Mike Bobo. Here's the thing, is that hiring somebody as an analyst should not be controversial at all because you can hire 1,000 of them. They could hire me as an analyst. It's not taking anything away. Like the on-field coaches, you get 10 of them. You have to make the best decision about who those 10 are. And I don't have any reason to believe that's what Mike Bobo would be at Georgia. I think he'd be an analyst. Now, I can go back and relitigate the past and say I think he was better as an OC than some of you give credit for. But even if that's true, that doesn't mean he's going to be offensive coordinator on this team right now. He's simply going to be an analyst, and of course you want that to be the case. You want as many analysts as you can get. I mean, we said the same thing about Will Muschamp because there were a lot of folks that laughed at Georgia hiring Will Muschamp, but anybody that had been a head coach in 2 different places, who had designed as many defenses as he had, of course you wanted that level of expertise around the program. And as it turns out, Muschamp very quickly went into an on-field coaching role and obviously, returned to his status as a top-shelf recruiter. Bobo, by the way, a good recruiter historically too, especially when it comes to the state of Georgia. The point, though, is that there is nothing controversial about hiring an analyst because that's simply additive. You're not prevented from doing anything because you hire Bobo. You could have Buster Faulkner and Mike Bobo and I don't know, David. You could start just throwing anybody you wanted to in that hat. There's just no limit to the number of analysts you can have. Let's see what else. Matt Rukavina says there are people that would say they want him for OC. Yeah, I think at this stage of the game, I'd probably prefer somebody else. Now, before they hired Monken, would I have considered him for offensive coordinator? Admittedly, at that time, I probably would have. I think now, though, I probably do feel different. That's one area in which I probably changed my opinion over the course of a couple of years. That's probably true. Let's do a couple more comments, and we'll go. Let me go to DawgNation.com. Dogs on Top says, as someone who's been here since day one, I can say that BA is very consistent with his comments on Bobo. I'm glad to hear that. I hope I can be somewhat consistent. There are some things which I change my mind, and if I do change my mind or if I have reason to alter my opinion, I'll usually try to be honest with you about that and say, hey, I used to feel this way. I think now I probably feel this way based on whatever new facts might be in evidence. So hopefully I'm mostly consistent, and when I'm not consistent, hopefully I'm transparent about why. Mike Goignier asked a good question. Is Georgia the 2021 national champions or the 2022 national champions? It's a very good question. Georgia is the 2021 national champions. The reason why stuff like this says 2022 is because the stuff that was made by the host committee has the date in which they hosted the game, which was in 2022. So all the stuff related to Indianapolis is going to say 2022. The same way the Sugar Bowl in which Georgia beat Notre Dame took place on January 1st, 1981. So Georgia won the 1980 national championship on a game played the first day in 1981. The same thing always happens with the Rose Bowl there as well. That Georgia won the Rose Bowl at the end of the 2017 season, but they won the 2018 Rose Bowl, and that's always it's just a little bit confusing. In fact, when I've referenced 2018 before in that realm, some folks have assumed that I got it wrong or something like that. But Georgia played the Rose Bowl January 1st, 2018. It was the end of the 2017 season. So Georgia is the 2021 national champion. So if you buy gear that says that, it's going to say 2021. But if your gear references Indianapolis, it's going to probably say 2022 because that's when Indianapolis hosted the game. And that is probably a little bit confusing. West Georgia Dog fan said, boom, who is Will Muschamp, did a lot behind the scenes that helped us win the national championship. Totally agree with that. Completely. I mean, Jalen Walker said Will Muschamp is the first coach he mentioned. When Walker committed to Georgia and they asked him why, the first guy he mentioned was Will Muschamp. So Muschamp was first through the door on a bunch of UGA recruits. Let's see what else. What else is going on? Fred Gleaton says, I couldn't offer an opinion on Brian McClendon as coach, but he's always been a very good recruiter and has the background to be knowledgeable on the position. I sort of view receivers coach and running backs coaches as guys whose recruiting skills are more important than the coaching. I definitely think that those are a couple of positions where it's really important to have that A-list recruiter type guy, and you want to be the on-field coach too if you can be, obviously, but the recruiting stuff is really important there, and obviously McClendon does have that. I think they're considering a lot of names for this, and while on a show like this, we've mostly gravitated towards the in-house names, or at least the in the family type names, DGD type guys, Terence and Hines and Brian McClendon. I do believe they're also considering outside names there as well. But I think the overall point that you get to is an important one, is that they are definitely going to consider the recruiting chops of the guy that gets hired. That's definitely going to be a strong consideration. No question about that. He says if Hines Ward is interested, he should have already been offered. I think that Hines Ward is a consideration for a job like this, but I don't think it's as much of a no-brainer as you do because of what you said, that recruiting is not easy. It's not. And while Super Bowl ring, Super Bowl MVP status, all-time great status as a player, that opens a lot of doors for you. Man, you have still got to be able to close the deal. It's like a salesman would say. You've got to be able to ask for the order. And that is just not the kind of thing that comes easy for everybody. That Hines Ward, as a wide receivers coach, would have an entry into conversations that other coaches might not have because he was successful as a player, because a lot of the families would know who he is. That starts the conversation in a way that some other coaches might not be able to start. But finishing the deal, closing the deal, getting the signature on the line that is dotted is the kind of thing that being an all-time great player does not necessarily guarantee your ability to do, as wide receivers coach. Doesn't mean that Hines Ward can't do it, and the fact that he's been willing to do the hard work to put himself in a position to be in a conversation like this makes him at least worthy of consideration, but I believe it's far from a no-brainer. A couple more. Back on YouTube for a moment. Jay Shipe says, are you aware that Jimbo Fisher made twice the amount of money at Kevin Sumlin and the same amount of time but had less wins? Yeah, I mean, obviously that was a big offseason conversation for us a year ago. I did predict Texas A&M to be better, and it turned out to be. Quarterback injury hurt that a little bit. And with the recruiting success that Jimbo has had, it is time for him to win more. I don't mind telling you that. I still am probably relatively high on the program overall being successful, but they do need to win more. I would say that's fair. Christopher Hansen says, do you think that Thomas Davis will get a chance to be an assistant coach at the college level? If he wanted to be, I think he'd be a very good one. Those are the kinds of guys that I think you do want in coaching. I think of all the guys we talk about, I don't think we give credit to his longevity in the NFL and just how amazing of an accomplishment that is. This is a sport that, as the old joke said, not for long. NFL stands for not for long. And yet Davis played, just half his life in the NFL. It's amazing to think that a career could last that long. And obviously, he was a great player, played the game the right way, good dude, seems like. So I want guys like that to be in coaching. I don't really know what Thomas Davis wants to do, but I want guys like that to be in coaching. And so if he wanted to do that, I think he'd be a great one. Okay, Ray Johnson, I didn't know this. Happy 237th birthday to UGA. That's really cool. What is it? The nation's first chartered state public university? I never really know what that means, but I've heard that said before. 1785, I believe. That's really cool. Really cool. Thomas Orzak says, is Ohio State a threat to win it all in 2022? It's going to be a great offense. Yeah, you got the quarterback, you got the running back. They got defensive issues. They bring the guy over from Oklahoma State to come over and be their defensive coordinator. Let's find out what kind of defense Ohio State puts on the field here in 2022, because that's one of those teams that once they became the best offense, and they were the highest scoring team in the country this past year, they lost a lot on defense. I'm not going to say because of that, but it certainly coincided with that. They have not been as good on defense the last couple of years as the offense has gotten better and better and better. CB says, yep, oldest public university in the country. That's a really cool thing. Really cool thing. Sacred Grove says, 1785, we still been fighting the British. Yeah, you got to wonder, what was life like back in the Peach State in 1785? Football team, I believe, started in 1892. I believe that was the first season of Georgia football, 1892. but the university itself starts in 1785. Paul Moon says, we were chartered first, but UNC had classes first. William and Mary is trying to take the oldest public school crown. Wait, is William and Mary a public school? For some reason, a hoity-toity name like, Bill and Madge, like that, I always kind of assumed that they would be a private school. But is William and Mary public? I didn't know that. But he says they started private. Okay, so they started private. They're public now. I always thought William and Mary was like a fancy pants school. Maybe it was at one point. Maybe it still is. I don't know. Jay Shipes rooting for Matthew Stafford this weekend. I'm sure a lot of Dog fans will be. Josh Grafton, yeah, we'll do a phone call cool down at some point in time. We'll actually probably do it on Zoom. We tried this the other day. I thought it worked really well. We'll do more of that in 2022 for sure. For sure. Real Boss wants a receiver out of the portal. My guess is they bring in somebody. I do believe they probably will. All right, final comments on Facebook and then DawgNation.com are going to go. Daniel Aldridge says Florida was a girls-only school for a while. I know Florida State was a teacher college for a while. Bill Kelly says UGA is the best, even if it's not the oldest. A lot of folks would certainly agree with that. Georgiana Olive says that UGA was actually chartered in Savannah. I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. Kyle Fold says he's got an ancestor that graduated from the law school in 1840. That's amazing. First in UGA Law School, 1840s. His home serves as UGA's president's mansion. Well, Kyle, I had no idea you had such a distinguished lineage. I'm quite impressed. I need to learn more about my ancestry. There may be some things I don't want to know, but I know my grandfather on my dad's side at one point in time had done some of that work and had like 7 or 8 generations kind of charted back, and pretty interesting. I don't know that I had any distinguished statesmen in my lineage, but still kind of cool. All right, whatever else. Anything else? Caleb Janney says Josh Downs. So I see people talking about this online all the time. Where's this coming from? Downs is a very good wide receiver at North Carolina. His brother, Caleb Downs, is a hoss at the safety spot for the 2023 class. A very good player. Very good player. Like him a lot. But where is the Josh Downs thing coming from? Is there anything to this whatsoever? Because all I see are people talking about Downs transferring, but I don't see any patient zero for this. I don't see any origin story for that rumor. So I'm going to need a little bit more on why anyone's even suggesting that it's a possibility. But he's a good receiver, and his brother is a heck of a safety who Georgia is very down the line on. Philip Jordan Wells says the national championship scarf is on eBay. Not surprised at that. Some of these media folks maybe he's trying to sell those. Joseph Kennedy says he's getting some good prices on some national championship gear online. Glad to hear that. All right, DawgNation.com, then we're off the air. Final comments. Mike Gagne said, can you imagine the first 100 years of UGA without any football? Yeah, that's kind of weird to think about, too. From 1785 to 1892, no football whatsoever. That's pretty wild. A lot of good comments rolling through here. All right, we got to go for right now, though. But thanks for being here. Y'all make sure you check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. Get that heating system tuned back up to factory fresh specs. R.S. Andrews will do that for you. And they'll take care of you, and they can breathe some new life into that unit. It only costs $99. So make sure you check that out today. Also, Atlanta Journal-Constitution. By the way, speaking of the AJC, before I tell you what's in the paper today, I was really proud. So last night I had to run over Kroger for a second. I bought a, loaf of bread. And as I was getting ready to check out, I saw they had a couple issues of the Top Dog, the book that I'm in. Had a couple of those left. I hadn't actually gotten a copy of the book yet, and so I saw Top Dog for sale at Kroger, and I bought one. So I went to the back. I'm going to bring it in tomorrow. I'll show it to you. I forgot to do it today. But my piece is the epilogue, the last piece in the book. I'm really proud of this. It's one of those things where I've never really been a writer by trade. I've always kind of just shouted into a microphone for a living. But seeing your name in print like that's really pretty cool. So if you haven't gotten your copy yet of Top Dogs, now, listen, Connor Riley's got a great story about Nolan Smith in there, and there's some good stuff from Steve Hummer and Michael Cunningham and Chip Towers and all that kind of stuff. It's a really cool book. It's a great souvenir to remember the national championship, but also a really great opportunity to read some of the good writing in there from guys like Chip and Steve and everybody else, and just kind of become more acquainted with the story of how Georgia actually traveled down the path to ultimately emerge as national champions. And I'm in there sharing a few thoughts there as well. So let me throw this on the screen for a moment. Check out the book, Top Dogs, if you want to order it. 800-888-4741. That's the number, 800-888-4741. Or the website, triumphbooks.com/Georgia Wins. That's triumphbooks.com/Georgia Wins. You can also go to the top of the page at DawgNation.com, and there's a link. You can order that right there. As far as the AJC goes today, NBA All-Star announcements are on the way. You can check that out for Trae Young and some of the other Hawks, who, by the way, have been on fire as of late. Hawks have won 5 straight, I believe, so feeling pretty good about all of that. Also, there's an interesting series that's coming in the AJC, kind of ongoing, about the impact of Georgia and its national championship, how it tangibly benefits the program moving forward and the university as well. So that's a really good thing to check out at ajc.com there too. And if you care about the politics stuff, and you obviously you should follow it and pay attention to it. Interesting polling data out there right now about all the upcoming elections, who's where and who's doing what, and kind of how that looks as you head towards a primary season and towards November's general election. So we don't talk about that here, but it's important to know what's going on there. ajc.com for more on that. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for being here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. We will see you back here tomorrow, 9:45 for First and 15, 10 a.m. for DawgNation Daily, presented by Merriweather and Tharp. After that, hope you all have a great day.